when I wrote the proposal for the stone space, I was becoming quite interested in the idea of other arts interacting together. And part of it came from when we were in lockdown, the first lockdown, and we were completely unable to go to exhibitions, go to concerts. Tons of things started happening online, and I quite enjoyed them at first. I became hooked on visiting the National Gallery in DC every day, because every day they'd have a robot that would go around a room, and it was fascinating. But then one day I realised it was as if I was on a hospital gurney. I wasn't actually there. I was sort of lying down either on my sofa or in my bed, because of course America wakes up at a different time than us. And I was very passive. And actually I couldn't tell you anything that I saw, even though I'm quite familiar with their collection. I would see things and it would just be a wave. It was nothing. It didn't touch me. It didn't move me. Nothing. And so I realised there's something wrong. And so when we were in lockdown, we started talking about exhibiting virtually. Again, I visited tons of people's exhibitions. I was very active. I can't remember anything. And nothing really touched, nothing really, it was almost like you were just in a nice tepid bath. There was no smell, there was no sound, just nothing. And I just felt there's something, when we go back to exhibiting, we're going to have to do it in a way that touches more than just, here are my pictures and I'm going to bog off now, and I'll see you at the opening, have a glass of wine or not, and then I might go to the pub or not, and that's it. And it just didn't feel very interactive, and not that everything has to be interactive, but it suddenly felt like a need, and maybe that need won't last forever. And so I was actually inspired to do this by this young man, Noah, because Noah was one of the most active people I knew online during that first lockdown. There were Zooms, there were webinars, there were, you name it, there was concerts, it was like non-stop, and it was so much energy. And I joined one of these webinars, and I was quite skeptical because it was about improvisation, and I came from the point that artists do not improvise. We just make things, but improvisation doesn't really make sense. I don't make something, then remake it. I just make it and then it's there. So it started, but then it starts making you think of people like Judy Chicago, who are more performance, and her smoke performances. So I did start thinking, there are people who do improvise, but I don't. Why don't I? What is wrong? Is there something wrong? Perhaps there isn't. So Noah was the sort of catalyst, and then Noah was also talking about collaboration. This was your big C word, wasn't it? And which is great, because my big C word is a bit different, not so positive. So collaboration and improvisation sort of became things that I kept hearing in my head. And then also I kept going back to an exhibition I'd seen, and I didn't lie, but it isn't the last exhibition I saw before lockdown. The last exhibition I saw before lockdown was Picasso at the Royal Academy. I went like 3 times. I kept sort of thinking I was going into COVID petri dish. But the exhibition my mind kept drifting back to was a retrospective of an artist called Dorothea Tanning, and it was on at the Tate, and it ended actually in June 2019, so well before we were all enclosed. But somehow something had touched me, and part of it was she made an installation that was an interior, the inside of a hotel room, and that was called Hotel du Pavot. I've taken away the du, and Chambre 202, which is room 202. And she based it on lots of things, actually. There are lots of things that she based the idea on. But one of the things that inspired her, she normally made paintings, but she was inspired to make soft sculpture because she went to a concert of Stockholm. And that changed her way of working completely. And from there, from making paintings, she just went to making soft sculptures. She felt like there was no way you could carry on doing what you'd been doing before. You had to change everything. And so I kept sort of drifting back to that point and thinking, well, how do I interact with music? I have it on in the background. What do I listen to in the studio? Do I react to it unbeknownst to me, unconsciously? Can I have more control over this? So then I started talking to Noah about what if we both started at the same starting point with Dorothea Tanning, went back to that moment where she has this cataclysmic change, and we talked about making music and me making things in reference to the compositions. And that has evolved. So the situation with the proposal with Stone Space, when they gave me the space, I'd already started a lot of sculptures, because I do make anthropomorphic sculptures. I have been for a long time. So I just sort of carried on. But then I was sort of fed the music in a very peculiar way. So the last 3 pieces that I made heard the music in different ways. So the one on the wall, the pink Owl Pro, is I only heard the electronic fixed bass, and the thing that Lucy played to the second time. And then the second piece that I made in relationship to music was, and perhaps more involved, was the piece that Lucy was standing behind. That's Hymn to the Chasm, which is the name of the piece that Noah composed. And so that piece I heard the backing track, and then Lucy phoned me and said, do you know what I do? And I said, I have no idea what you do. I might imagine, I'm not a composer, I have no, So then she played it over the phone, and then I changed the whole colours. I just reacted to that. So it wasn't a case of hearing the music continuously, it was once was perhaps enough. And the idea is then the music becomes associated with those sculptures, like a perfume or a smell, or like an earworm, actually. And then the table piece is sort of the culmination of both, because I actually finished it in January, and by then we had recorded Lucy playing, so then I was completely familiar with the actual piece. So that's the history, the background. I think I should introduce Noah, and he'll talk a little bit about the process he used. I'm going to sit down.
Thank you very much, Marie-Therese. I hope you don't mind if I stay seated. This is such a comfy chair. It's lovely to meet you all. First of all, I think it's really worth saying big congratulations and thank you to Marie-Therese for a wonderful exhibit inside. I think just marvellous. So, for those of you who don't know me, I think lots of new faces today, lots of people I've known before, so it's great to meet you. My name's Noah, and I'm a composer, which mostly means that I sit at a piano with a cup of Earl Grey tea, and then look at my watch and it's 5 o'clock. That's how most days go. But this is different. This was really fascinating for me, because I've always heard music as I approach and look at sculptures. I remember very early on, I must have been about 10 or 11, and we went to Henry Moore Sculpture Park, which I think he's one of our great artists, Henry Moore, and I was really alive to that very early on. And those drawings as well, those wonderful drawings of those endless figures in the underground, sort of cowering from the air raid. It's just amazing. And immediately I would hear sound, bowed vibraphones or something. That's where you take a double bass bow and sort of move it along a piece of metal, and it makes a sort of whistling sound. So something about the texture of the sculptures themselves would actually end up in the pieces of music I was imagining. Now, I wasn't a composer at that time. It took me a while to sort of work out what was going on and come to terms with it and start getting down onto paper that which you're hearing in your imagination, which is quite a tough journey. I've also known these guys for many, many years. My earliest memory of Lucy is actually, I think, because you played in a quartet with my sister, and I went with you and my sister to see the King's Speech when that was first on. So we must have been about 10. So we've been in dialogue for ages, and I've always known and really loved Marie-Therese's sculptures. the words which always come to mind for me are sort of eerily beautiful, which is a very strange concoction of adjectives. It's not something that you could use to describe very many artists, perhaps, in their work. It's really distinctive. So when we got talking about the possibility of doing a piece of music responding to her work, I was immediately very enthusiastic about it. Now, I have to confess, I did actually take Marie-Therese's work as my first starting point for writing the piece, Dorothea Tanning second, and you actually introduced me to the work of Dorothea Tanning, which was fascinating because I'm obsessed with surrealism. I'm obsessed with the philosophy which underlies it, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and all the depth psychologists that followed from them and studied with them. I'm interested in the artists which took on their ideas, like Salvador Dali and Joan Miro and Marcel Duchamp. The Dada movement sprung off from there, of course. And the fact that actually Freud hated surrealist art. He also hated music. Really unusual. He really admired people like Dali. He admired the technical ability with which he was able to craft these amazing surreal landscapes, but he actually disagreed fundamentally with the premise of surrealist art. So all these things going on in my mind while I was writing this piece called Hymn to the Chasm. So I knew it would be for Lucy. So it started out as a solo violin piece. But what it ended up being was a piece for violin and fixed media electronics, or as Jono, who wonderfully recorded, produced and mixed the recording, which is playing on a loop while the gallery's open, the backing track. So I wrote the piece first and imagined that there might be sort of a sound underneath it, because the hymn is the song, that's the violin, and the chasm, that's the surrealist part, I suppose. That's the deep, dark opening in which all your fears manifest themselves and kind of loom out. And I often feel like, particularly with your bird sculptures, Marie-Therese, they've sort of emerged from some kind of chasm, and it's kind of scary while also being incredibly beguiling. So writing the violin line came first, and then I actually took my cello out for the first time in about 3 years and made some sounds, recorded them, and used those as the fruits from which I sort of created the backing track. And then it was a process of talking about it with Lucy and working out how we would do it. We recorded it with Jono, and we played it here today. So the reason that first go through was slightly disorienting for Lucy was because the track that was playing was not just the fixed media, it was fixed media and Lucy. So it was like you were seeing double, and Lucy certainly was seeing probably triple. So that was, it actually sounded really interesting. I really enjoyed it, although I don't think you did.
I wouldn't say I didn't. I think it was mostly that I didn't realise at the beginning. So it's got this kind of, everything is very quiet and it's all harmonics, and so it almost sounded like it was part of the backing track that I just hadn't noticed already or something. And then all of a sudden I heard myself playing something really loudly on this backing track that I was about to play in real life. Yeah. And then it just became a bit, I mean, all the more soft and quiet bits, I think it kind of works. However, when there's one sport sounder going there, which is all of a sudden very loud note, and then I have to do it whilst I'm supposed to be doing something completely, I don't know, I think it was a little bit disconcerting. But it was okay. Well,
look, why don't I hand over to you now and tell us a little bit more about what it was like learning a piece which is so kind of free and mercurial and not what you might usually have across your desk, for instance.
So I have to admit I'm a lot less prepared than the other two, but likewise I'm going to stay seated because it was really quite comfortable. For me as a violinist, we have improvisation with many people go into composition like Noah, but ultimately the interpretation of a piece that we're playing is going to be our creative element. It's there where we can kind of express our feelings about something that quite often was written centuries before. So it's very different. It does have a creative element, but although it's part of the arts, we don't really have all that much say. We have say, but not as much as sometimes I would like. And I think what I really love about this piece is something you might not have noticed. It's built by fragments. So each line, there's about 6 lines. Some of them are very explicit. This happens and this happens. And then some of them are split into tiny little fragments, and I actually can choose how I want to organize it, how I want to do I want to play this 5 times, then this once, and then jump between them. I just have to be vaguely on time for the next for the next line. And for me, it was really important to not plan what I was going to do on these lines, so that it would actually be during that moment, because I was being a little bit more flexible with the timings marks between each part. What did I feel like I needed to add to the backing track to make that link to the next bit, and kind of be inspired in the moment instead of, as we quite often do as violinists, completely and utterly plan every single second so that we're 100% ready. So I think for me that's something I've really enjoyed about playing this piece, is that every single time it's different. So even when we record it, there's still loads of differences between the first recording, the second recording, and likewise in the live performance. If anything, I think it's even more interesting because I can, now that I'm immersed by the sculptures, that also obviously influences slightly what I choose to play at what moment. So I don't know if is that any good?
Great. So I guess we could have a little bit of Q&A now. So if you have any questions for any of us three, please we would love it actually. Because not that we've run out of things to say, we really could carry on, but you might
go on all
start
night
thinking,
if you wanted us to.
yeah, or you might have something really specific you want to ask.
Sort of generally for all three of you, in how do you think it's changed your practice going forward, or your starting point or has it changed your starting point going forward? And I guess sort of coming back to your point about improvisation, which was super interesting, like, and I feel that you've got this experience of improvising in a way that normally you wouldn't be seeing. Like, do you think that's something that you would take forward in your work, or do you have an idea of how you do it?
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because I think my practice changed during lockdown. I think my practice has been changing for the last 7-8 years. My practice has definitely changed a lot, but quite gradually, and then the lockdown was sort of like everything fast forwarded and changes seemed to move much more quickly. And one of the biggest changes was I did a lot less planning, because I used to, especially if you make a big sculpture, you have to plan, because otherwise you can end up with just a mess, pile. But then perhaps there's nothing wrong with just a pile. And so I think I loosened up a lot, and I became more random. And actually Claire, was watching me, because I had to build in the garden, and she was watching me, and she said, it's like watching someone who doesn't know what a puzzle is.
Sorry.
Taking bits of things and gluing them and just
Sorry, Mum.
It was much more, almost looked haphazard. I mean, I do have an idea. It's not like I go to it blindly. I have an idea or an experiment I want. But I think, yeah, my practice is changing, and I can see also that, in a way, acknowledging an influence isn't a bad thing, whereas usually as artists we know we're influenced, but then we sort of, I'm sure in music it's the same, you try to hide it, because you don't want to seem derivative, you want to be original. And now I sort of think, well, it's very difficult to, unless you actually take a piece and you actually do exactly like it, it's just, it becomes mine. So it's like I've digested something and throw it up again.
I see in one of your works you've got some sunflowers, haven't you, in your family book. Are they from Dorothea Tanning? I remember.
No, they're not. Curiously,
Okay.
So when I saw Dorothea Tanning's work, I was quite struck, because there were a lot of imagery. She uses a lot of imagery and things, iconography that I already used. So sunflowers has appeared in my work before, and then that composition was actually influenced, and that was a completely conscious decision to take a composition by Max Beckmann, where he is sitting around a table and they've got a candle in the middle. And I kept, there was only one shop that was open that we could go to that was a florist, and a friend of mine has a florist, and she kept having sunflowers. It was a bumpy year for sunflowers, apparently, and so I kept buying sunflowers and bringing them home, and then they just crept into work. But I've had sunflowers and flowers before, but it's interesting you bring that home, yeah.
Could I just add for a minute to what you were saying about the improvisation piece and how it's affected you? Because I just think, only because you brought up the webinar, which is so, because that was what, 18 months ago now or so?
No, wasn't it longer?
Maybe it's long, well, it was August 2020, so July. That sort of time. But I mean, I hadn't even realised this, but my practice and the way I look at improvisation has moved on a lot since I gave that talk, professing to know all about it. You know, so it's really as a professor I know said, you know, if you want to get to know a topic, you do a series of lectures on it, and by the end, you're beginning to know something about it. But it just reminds me. Yeah, you think so?
We've done that.
A teacher of mine once said something, and I don't know whether you'll agree with this, Lucy. But a teacher of mine once said that the difference between improvising and composing is that as an improviser, your job is to have a string of ideas that you can continue to create as you go, so that you never break the flow and you journey wherever you journey. But as a composer, you have to recognise the idea which has the most potential, and then get rid of all the others and unfold that idea for all it's worth. So it's such an interesting view of what an artist is, because in a sense, the first part is to have an idea which is both novel and useful, or to some degree both of those, and then you've got to have the patience to unfold it and unfold it and unfold it and explore it, and to get all the juice, all the potential out, and then still have something in the end which feels kind of spontaneous. Which, you know, for instance, with your crows, I see that is, let's make another crow, and it's slightly different, and each time we're kind of reassessing what a crow is and what it might mean to people. You know, but you might completely disagree.
No, they're quite formal ideas, each crow. They're much more formal than my bigger work, so they're much more about exploring a certain idea of making, so like planes, and you know, some of them are about intersecting shapes, some of them are, so they're always exploring a formal sculptural idea. And so one of them, I managed to make one that you can turn it in any direction and it just works. You have to work out which one that is. Any other questions?
Marie-Therèse, can you talk to us about crows and owls?
Crows and owls. Oh, birds.
No, specifically crows and owls.
Yeah.
I mean, there aren't owls here, but there are owls elsewhere. So.
Yeah. I can a bit. I can bore you with owl stories, or bird stories. When I was a child, I had these, I think I bought them in a jumble sale, a series of books on woodlands and plants, and another one on birds. And I discovered that I could draw birds, copy the birds quite easily, and I liked it. So I drew a lot of birds when I was a child, basically copying them. I don't really look out of the window at birds. I mean, I do, but I don't. They move too fast.
A real life thing.
They move too fast. So then I think that birds came into my work more obviously in about 2012. I did a series of drawings and works about trees and fruit. They were sort of surreal and magical realism, and I got interested in Sigmund Freud's story of the Wolfman. And if you don't know the story, just look it up. It's very easy. And then I started inserting birds more obviously, and I was painting and drawing a lot more than making sculpture. And the thing that's been quite hard for me that I've been sort of exploring has been how to get something that was flat, because I was drawing it flat, into something 3D. I experimented with cardboard and resin, to the annoyance of everybody in my building, in my studio building, who weirdly, even though I did it late at night on a Saturday, I thought no one will be around. Monday, hello, it smells funny here. Yeah. So anyway, so then I had to think about, well, I usually work in wood, how can I, and they've sort of evolved from there, and I see them as a sort of emotional response and emotional expression. They're much more direct, they're much more about my inner emotional world. My larger sculptures are more, perhaps more formal, but they're also an emotional response, because my work is, after all, you know, it's all about the mind and what happens in transformation and movement. But the birds, because they're quite small, they're much smaller, they're much faster to make, they are definitely an expression of, you know, so they're almost like living paintings in a way. They're very visceral in that way. So,
I don't know if it's a question or maybe something to take off on, a comment that you've talked, all of you, very specifically about the creative process and your interaction between your creative processes, responding to one another. But of course, what we're presented with here is the fusion as a visitor and an environment that has visual and auditory, thank you. You know, commingling and in creating an environment. So it's, did you feel, either of you, that eventuality, that that's what you were creating toward, that it was an environment that would immerse people in that, you know, be a visitor in that sense? Or do you think it was more purely just the creative process that you were going through?
I mean, I think we've talked so many times about the idea of doing a show where there would be a musical element, and I know that, for example, I'm organising a concert where there will be a visual element, so it's very inspired by another artistic group. I think what really was interesting here was that it wasn't, it's not putting things that were already existent together, it's really creating things for this show. It's not a question of any, oh, I'll just put this sculpture in the next show and then do this. It's a object in itself, is that room with the music, with the whole of it. And for me, it's always been that. That was always the idea for this show, even if the idea had already been discussed. I don't know about you.
So for me, I think the interesting thing is Lucy is the voice, in a way. She is expressing the, so actually you're the one who used the word perfume, and then I completely lifted it. I took the line, I really am awful.
I had prepared something, but then my mum heard it and read it all out for you guys. You purposed it.
I nicked her best line. I'm really sorry, Lucy.
It's okay. You just didn't explain it right, but it's fine.
No, you can explain it. But she is the voice, and in a way, I mean, everything's been moved. So up till now, the installation has been quite different. The table that's on the side was in the middle. The sculptures were more in the middle, so it was a little bit more of a, should we say, maze to go around. Not really, it's not big enough, but you know. So it felt more like a real room, whereas now everything's been pushed to the side, which is how I hate sculpture being, you know, pushed to the side. But it has to be, because otherwise you don't fit, and in a way, you guys walking in, you're walking into a sort of 3D surround sound experience. So it's a different, yeah.
Marie-Therese, are you saying that you were playing the music without the live element all the time anyway? So
yeah.
So that would mean that this is hugely different, because I mean, without the table and with the real beings.
It's different, but in a way I think exhibitions should change. So So there was I did have an idea initially that I would come in every week and move something around, and then I'm afraid my level of energy has dimmed. So I didn't do that, but I did have this idea that I would move little things and see if people noticed, things are moving. So I don't think exhibitions should be always static.
But the live element made it feel more like the music was really an important, very important bit, rather than the background that there's this nice atmosphere in here because the music. But it actually visually and see Lucy playing so beautifully, looking so beautiful, it was all added to the whole.
It's a performance.
Yeah.
And I think today is the performance. I think also when I wrote the proposal, it was locked down. So I initially wrote it thinking, well, nobody will ever enter. So then that Lucy would be the only person in, and then people would have to sort of be passing by and to hear it. But obviously we are now allowed to, so then I had to sort of go with that idea of just leaving her in the room playing. But I like the idea of her being like in a sound box. Like those, when we were children, we used to get those quite horrible music boxes, and you lift the lid and then this ballerina would twist. But it's as if I've ripped off the ballerina, the music's playing, but I've rearranged everything on that little.
Some composers do actually write with music boxes.
Is it?
Yeah, I haven't done it. Maybe
What,
that's
with a little
on
mirror?
Yeah, no, well, as in the sound of music boxes. I know a composer who writes exclusively for toy piano. So she writes pieces for a little toy piano, this big, little box. And this lovely girl who is the composer performer, she sits there cross-legged on a huge stage with this toy piano and plays it here. I want to try and answer what Jim was saying, because I think it's so interesting. I've spent a lot of time thinking about collaboration, how it works, and when it doesn't work, why it doesn't work. I think there's a basic problem, which is that the reality to which we're all subject is basically a combination of nested hierarchies in which we all have our place in them somewhere. And collaboration is a very egalitarian pursuit. So the problem with it is that anybody with what Freud would have called a healthy ego isn't comfortable completely giving up ownership. But if you're going to collaborate with someone with whom you're in completely the same space, neither of you can completely own the final product because you've both contributed. So in a sense, what we've modelled here, I think, is a great example of how collaboration can work really well, because we both have our own domains of competence. So Marie-Therese and I are doing completely different things. I'm doing musical stuff in response to visual, and you're doing visual stuff in response to music. And in that way, what we create is more than the sum of its parts. We can both completely bring our in the sense that also we have a performer, it's literally more than the sum of its parts as well. So I think that's good. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I don't like interfering in other people's jobs.
No,
You do yours, I do mine. Don't tell me how to do mine. And that actually is the best, because actually collaborations that usually fail is when one person drifts into the other person's world and starts telling them what they should be doing, or trying to alter the way they work. And that's not what this has been about. It's definitely been about our two practices coming together and doing something, and it then drifting off back to our world, and then maybe coming back together. And
Hope so.
Yeah. So it's not like a huge. I'm going to change the way you work.
Well, can I say thank you for really opening this up for us? It's been really enlightening and exciting. So thank you very much. Are you going to play again, Lucy? Lovely.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Yes.
And I have a further suggestion that after Lucy's played, people are welcome to sit around in here or walk around in and out, but we could move the pieces back so they could see your
Yes.
original curation after Lucy's played again.
I think that would be great.
So
Yeah.
if people are staying around here in the library, upstairs is beautiful, the lovely brass cases from the 1930s, the Art Deco brass cases are worth seeing, and it's that way to the toilet. If you want to nip out and get a coffee, we have cafes here, on the corner there, so you can nip out and get a drink and come back. But that would give us time to move your pieces back
Yes.
for the afternoon.
Yes.
Do join us for one last performance first.
Yes, thank